first amendment does rewrite the bill. So why don't we go ahead and start out on Amendment 013. Okay, first of all, let's go ahead and get a motion second on the bill. Motion second on House Bill 2147. Now, since the amendment writes the bill, 013041, do I have a motion? Second? We have a motion second on the amendment, so we're now open for discussion. Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee, for the opportunity to present this bill. This is honestly probably the most interesting bill that I've written and the hardest worked on bill that I've written. This bill has been in the making for 3 years, and I think we've arrived at a product that can possibly be a model for other states and possibly for the NCAA. What this bill does, it sets up a student-athlete trust fund that will in turn fund a student-athlete graduation grant fund. This graduation grant fund, it will assist us in increasing our student-athlete graduation rate and recruitment. This bill will give our student-athletes, those who have generated quantifiable revenue in the billions for our state and for our universities, and unquantifiable amounts of revenue generated in ad impressions and other goodwill for our colleges and universities and state, a small amount of startup money to start a business, possibly go back to school, or fix any other financial situations that they may have incurred while being in our colleges and universities. This is how this will work. The athletic programs in our universities, and this is for Division I universities only, public universities, we will basically break up the sports programs into 2 tiers. The first tier being basketball, football, track and field, and baseball. Second tier being all other sports. Upon graduation, the students will be able to apply for a grant pending which sport they played. If they played in a Tier 1 sport, they can apply for a grant of up to $50,000. If they played in a Tier 2 sport, they can apply for a grant for up to $25,000. And I'm sure that the question that's on most people's mind on the committee is how this thing will be funded. This is how we intend on funding this. We're asking the Division I schools in our state to contribute 1% of the revenue that's generated from their athletic programs to the Student Athletes Trust Fund. This trust fund, in turn, will be invested by our state treasurer. The revenue generated off of the trust fund will then go into the Student Athletes Graduation Grant Fund to fund the grant program. The revenue that the colleges and universities, the Division I schools in our state, contribute to this trust fund will then be returned to these colleges and universities. So it's a zero wash in regards to the revenue. I want to talk real quick about revenue that's being generated in college sports. At this time, and I'm going to hold up this piece of paper. At this time, NCAA generates 872. I hope that looks right to you. Other way? Wrong side? Am I doing it? I'm left-handed, so okay. 872. Come on this side, Oscar.
$sign goes in front of the number.
Does that look right to you? 872. I ran out of space. Not 872,000, but $872 million annually. $872 million annually. UT last year, UT numbers, please. Okay. UT last year generated $102 million annually. There should be another sheet over there for, oh, here it is, right here. I'm sorry, I got the props. Here we are. So sorry. Calling him out of order, my intern. And so this is what, is this the UT numbers? Yeah. UT generated, sorry y'all for being so clumsy. Hold that. $102 million plus dollars. That's 2013 numbers, right? 2012 numbers. Okay. All right. And lastly, my last prop, I want to show you how much money a student athlete received in that process. $0. Doesn't take much paper to put this one on. $0. Now, let's talk about that. The student athlete, which is the most integral part of this revenue generation for our state, for our universities, the most integral part. If you remove the student athletes, you generate absolutely $0. But yet, in all of these billions with a B of dollars that are being generated, the student athletes receive absolutely $0. Now, what I'm proposing is not to pay student athletes. We're not paying student athletes here. We are giving graduates startup money to start up a business, to start up, go back to school, to pay off some unpaid debts. And they also have, in the process of playing Division I sports in our state, they also sustain injuries that are with them for the rest of their lives, long after they leave our colleges and universities. That's a heavy debt to pay. But it's not the colleges and universities that are paying for these injuries long after their eligibility has expired. Because after their eligibility has expired, the colleges and universities are looking at the next prospect that's going to generate those same numbers or more that we just showed you. And Mr. Chair, if you will allow us to go out of, go into recess rather, to hear from, this guy was a McDonald's All-American, highly sought after, top 25 prospect in the country that had, and there was a fight between University of Memphis and University of Tennessee to get this guy to come and play at their college, at their university. And Mr. Chair, with your indulgence and the committee's indulgence, if we can hear from Tony Harris, I appreciate it.
Without objection, Mr. Harris, come on, we recognize you. I'm sorry, I was looking the wrong side of the room. Just state your name for the record.
Tony Harris. Good afternoon. Like I said, my name is Tony Harris. I'm a graduate and former University of Tennessee Vol basketball player. I want to talk just briefly about this issue and some of my past.
I will limit you to 2 minutes, and then from there I'll have anybody on the committee ask you questions where you can continue if you need to, but you're recognized.
Okay, thank you. Like I said, I want to talk about some of my past collegiate experiences real briefly. The issue of the question is, should student athletes get paid? And as a former college basketball player, I can remember asking myself during my playing days and now as a spectator, and my answer hasn't changed. When I was playing, I remember feeling exploited because I helped generate millions of dollars for the program and the state of Tennessee, but yet I was discarded when my usefulness to the program had expired. When I arrived at the University of Tennessee in the fall of '97, basketball attendance jumped tremendously, unlike the previous year. And the 4-year span I was there, we played in the NCAA tournament 4 years in a row, 20 or more wins every year, and record highs in home game attendance. I can recall a time during my junior year, a friend of one of my close relatives bought me a vehicle so I could commute wherever I needed to and also travel back home to Memphis. The athletic director at the time was told that I was driving a new vehicle. A few days later, I find myself in a meeting with the AD and members of the athletic department. In this meeting, I was interrogated with many questions about a vehicle I most desperately needed at that time, but all I could think about during the meeting was this is definitely exploitation and selfishness to the fullest. I was thinking about how much the program benefited since my arrival, and here I am in the AD's office being questioned and blackmailed to return a vehicle in which they had no part in contributing or purchasing. That same year, which was 2000, right after we lost the Sweet 16 to the University of North Carolina, once again I found myself at the round table with the athletic director and his staff. This time it was a little bit more serious than my previous visit early in the year. At this point in time, I was coming off a great year and was very adamant about leaving school and entering the NBA draft. While in the meeting with the AD and staff, I was asked by the athletic director, was I considering entering the NBA draft? I told him yes. From that point, he pulled out an envelope, and I'll never forget, inside was a list of phone records where a New York-based agent was calling my dorm room during the season. This particular agent was giving me feedback, from the NBA draft boards during the season to inform me of my status. I never took anything from the agent. I told the AD, but all he had to say was, I think you better reconsider your decision about leaving school, or should I turn you in? Once again, I found myself, the former McDonald's All-American high school phenom from Memphis, was being interrogated and blackmailed by the program that recruited him so hard and told him all the things he wanted to hear coming out of high school and how much they needed him. I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. I had a lot of emotions. I was hurt. I was confused. I was angry. I felt used and, you know, at times literally like a rag doll, to be honest with you. My senior year, I injured my ankle very badly, and the team doctors did x-rays on my ankle on which I've never seen the x-rays. But I was cleared to play and was pressured by the program to play, but I couldn't because the pain was so severe. So after the season, I wanted a second opinion. After getting one, I was told by doctors in Memphis that I had several chip bones floating around in my ankle and that I needed surgery. So after all this, I came to realization that the program wasn't too interested in allowing me to spread my wings and fly into the next level of my purpose in life, but were interested in restricting me to stay in school so I could continue to help the program generate millions and fill their pockets. This is an experience I'm thankful that I never have to go through again, and sadly I know that I'm not the only athlete that's experienced this or currently going through it now. But there is a solution, and that leads me back to the question I asked at the beginning. Should student athletes get paid? And I say absolutely yes. And because of this, I want to personally thank Representative Antonio Parkinson for allowing me to share my story briefly. And I really believe he has a brilliant plan that will compensate these student athletes and jumpstart their career after they finish, with the stipulation that, of course, the student athletes must graduate. So in closing, I just hope my past experiences and insight I share with you is considered while getting this bill passed. I'll be the first to say that I'll be very elated for future student athletes, and as for myself, just justification. So I just want to thank everybody for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We appreciate you taking time to come up here today. Does any of the committee have questions for Mr. Harris while in recess? Representative Pitts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harris, thank you for being here and telling your story.
Thank you.
I know it took courage to do that.
Absolutely.
Did you graduate from the University of Tennessee?
Yes, I did.
What year?
It was in 2008.
Okay. Were you on scholarship the whole time?
When I was in school prior to 2008?
Yeah, when you were
Yes.
at university.
Yes.
Did you receive anything beyond a scholarship as far as not illegally? I'm not trying to trap you. I'm just trying to, like per diem or travel money or items like that?
No, I didn't receive anything extra except, all student athletes receive, per diem, which was basically $20 on the road.
Okay. And you mentioned injuries.
Correct.
What's the status of your health right now as a result of those injuries?
Well, the ankle that I injured, I still have chronic pain from that still to this day. And, when I got surgery, I had to pay for that out of my pocket.
So the university did not see you beyond graduation?
No, they didn't.
As far as your injuries?
When I got injured, when I was at the University of Tennessee, I took x-rays. Team doctor took x-rays, but I never saw the x-rays. So all I was told was, man, you're okay, you're cleared to play.
Have you requested your medical records from the university?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
No.
I would encourage you to do that. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Representative Love? Any question? Okay. Any further questions? Representative Kane?
And just for clarity, everybody thinks when you go to college, if you're on scholarship, it's a full ride. And there's all different variations of that to, one of my children got 20% for books and tuition but didn't get, and that was from track and field. One just ran because he loved to run. I mean, he was still on the track team. But so there's all different variations. Room and board tuition when you were playing basketball, or no?
Yes, I stayed in a dorm.
Okay.
Right.
And then the other thing, Joe, usually is they'll get some kind of clothing, tennis shoes, stuff like that, depending on what their sport is. But that's generally about it.
Right.
And the medical treatment is supposed to happen while they're in their 4 years, but then when
Correct.
they leave, it all stops.
Correct.
Yeah.
Further questions for our guests while we're still in recess? Seeing none. Okay, thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back in session now. with that explanation, we do have a motion and second on the amendment 13041. Any discussion on the amendment, which does write the bill? Does write the bill. I think you brought an interesting concept to us, one that we haven't. I never would have thought would have come this year with all the other things, but yeah. So, a couple questions I had. You said this will be funded through a trust fund, 1% of the money generated.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the way it works is the Division I schools will contribute 1% of the receipts from the athletic program to the trust fund.
So the receipts, 102 million you pointed out, was like UT. Is that correct?
Yes, that's just one. Yep, one
Okay,
school.
so the 1% of that figure.
Yes, sir.
And then whatever
Yes,
the TBR system.
Yes, sir. And then the 1% will be invested by the state treasurer. The trust fund basically will be invested by the state treasurer. And the state treasurer, the revenue generated from the investment will go to the graduation grant fund. The 1% that was invested by the schools will be returned to the schools.
That would be returned when? I mean,
the way it works is if 1% is invested in 2015, and we're starting with the freshmen of 2015 if this bill is passed. 1% will be invested by the schools in 2015, 2016, 17, and 18. 2019, the 1% that was invested in 15 will be returned. 2020, the 1% that was invested in 16 will be returned. And that's how it works. And what this other amendment, I know we're not on it yet, what the other amendment does is says that when the grant fund is solvent in itself and it can self-perpetuate, then we come back to the House and the Senate and the committee and stop it if we need to.
Then what have you talked to the state treasurer about their willingness to establish such a program?
Well, I've mentioned the bill to the state treasurer a couple of times in passing, but he hadn't had anything to say about it.
Okay,
And
I do think
no one's come to my office in that regard.
Thank you, and I do think we need to hear from the UT and TBR systems about this also. Representative Love, did you have a question before we go into recess?
Thank
You're
you, Mr.
recognized.
Chairman. I just want to ask the sponsor, do you see this as a benefit and a way to kind of walk in lockstep with the governor's Drive to 55 program?
I think I do, and actually it's interesting that you asked it because I hadn't thought about it before you asked it, but I do, and I see most of these student athletes either utilizing this revenue, this funding that they get to either go back to school and increase their education capacity, or possibly start up a business here in the state of Tennessee and create more jobs with it.
Because they have to be graduates to even apply, correct?
They have to be graduates to even smell the paper.
I got you.
And one last thing I want to touch on to the committee, Mr. Chair, before we go out of recess is, when I initially drafted this legislation 3 years ago, the original draft would have ran afoul of the NCAA and their rules. And we carefully crafted this legislation to ensure that these students are no longer part of the program and they are actual graduates of the university, which keeps them free and clear of the NCAA to be able to receive this grant.
Representative Kane.
Okay, so we set up this fund. Student athletes can apply. What is the criteria to apply? I mean, what do you want to go into business? Do you want to go? I mean, do you have to write a paper and then they assess it based on your need? What's all the background?
We don't have a stipulation for them to apply outside of the fact that they were part of a state of Tennessee public college, Division I college, played sports, and they've graduated. That's the criteria to apply.
But you're going to have some kind of panel of people set up in order to decide how to disseminate the money. Otherwise, everyone's going to ask for a $50,000 grant. It'll be given, and the money will all disappear. I mean, some people may only need $10,000, and I guess the part that's still missing is it's not really needs based. I mean, these have all been qualified by being an athlete and graduating. That you made it to this point. But then I guess the question is, how do you decide whether one person needs $10,000 and one person needs $50,000, and how is your panel of people be set up?
Thank you, Representative Kane. That's actually spelled out in the legislation. No one will receive $10,000 or $50,000. The way it works is, if you played in a Tier 1 sport, the fund the amount of funding that's available the year you graduate will be divided evenly amongst the graduates that played in Tier 1 sports and amongst the graduates that played in Tier 2 sports. Is that better? So that funding it goes up to $50,000.
So you're just going to get a check because you played sports. You're not going to have to ask for the check.
Well, you have to apply for the grant. Yes, sir. And the way the bill lays out is the grant money from the graduation grant fund will be sent to the schools by the treasurer, so that the amount of funding because they're going to send the amount of graduates that they're going to have for that year to the treasurer. The treasurer will then disperse the amount of money that is set for that year's graduates. I hope that answers your question.
Right, so everybody's going to get an even share of whatever the pot was divided by the number of athletes you had graduate based on the tier that you
Yes, sir.
sport it was. Okay,
Yes, sir.
makes perfect sense.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman Brooks.
A couple of questions. I presume you're aware that in some Division I schools that those costs for doing athletics is supported by the institution. For example, I think I'm correct at UT Martin, UT Chattanooga, probably all of the Board of Regents schools, including, I know right now East Tennessee State is pretty well, the institution's footing the entire bill because they've had no revenue stream. So does that come into play in the sense of your calculations that they still contribute 1%? So that now we're getting into revenue from the state and revenue from the students that will pay this money out to these folks that have participated in sports.
And thank you.
Go ahead, yes, sir.
Okay. It's 1% of the receipts from television time, merchandising, ticket sales that will be contributed. And please be reminded, Chairman Brooks, that 1% will be returning back to that school.
At some time later.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So what you're trying to do is just use the money for a period of time.
Yes, sir.
And the money goes back.
Goes back to the school. Yes, sir.
The initial hit is where they're going to have to make up the difference. Like the year you pull out 1%, the very first year.
Yes, sir.
That's a loss. Now, when that money goes back, then
it's a wash.
It's a wash.
Yes, sir. So I don't know if it's a loss per se. I guess we could say it's a. I mean, if we.
Well, yeah, that particular year there are less 1% of revenues.
Then I guess I'm not trying to be argumentative, Chairman Brooks, but the 1% going back would then be a gain.
It would be a wash because that second year you're going to draw out more money.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Am I correct in the sense like that little squirrel in the cage that just keeps running?
But it is cyclic. But I just want to make sure that the committee understands that the money that's drawn out is going back to the school
at some point.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Resident Love, you have a question before we go, and I do want to get UT and TBR, but you go ahead.
Yeah, more of a comment, part of a question. I want to commend the sponsor. I'm thinking about any of the initiatives that we have where we're providing scholarships. That first year is always a hit until it gets everything started back up. And I'm thinking about the availability of funds for athletes who may find themselves, again, wanting to go back to school or wanting to start some business is a great idea. So I just want to add that piece in there. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if you mind real quickly if I respond to that also.
You may.
I think it's important to note also that with this bill, I believe, and some of us believe rather, that this will increase, number one, the graduation rates in our colleges and universities, but it also serve as a great recruitment tool to our colleges and universities for those that are considering going into sports programs. So, for example, if you have an individual that is a star athlete that's coming out of high school and he has a choice between UT and Alabama, and we can tell them upon your graduation, you can receive up to $75,000 to get your life started. I know if I was that athlete and Alabama didn't have the same program, I would be coming to UT. Furthermore, once this bill is enacted, I can almost guarantee you this will be the model that is taken up across the United States, because right now you have litigation against the NCAA and some universities in this regard. You also have students trying to unionize in this regard so that they can receive some money from these revenues, and that's not what we want. What we want is to do the right thing. These students generate billions of dollars for us. It's the right thing to do, to make sure that we take care of them and allow them to get started in their life, because they've allowed a lot of us to get started in our lives. And if you think about the amount of jobs that's generated and the revenue that's generated from our sports programs, we have great sports programs in Tennessee. UT, Vandy, University of Memphis, Austin P. I shouldn't have started naming because I might leave someone out. Tennessee State. But we have great programs, Mr. Chair, and that's the right thing to do.
So we'd be the first state to do this if this were enacted, right?
We'll be the first state to do this, and we should lead every other state in the union by doing this.
Representative Berry, did you?
I talked with Representative Parkinson this afternoon. A very innovative idea, and you know, on its face, I plan to support the bill. But I'm listening to you, and I think there's some things we got to work out. And I can tell you now, I can tell you later. But if we want to vote today, I guess I should tell you now. What you just said about it being an incentive to recruiting, I would like to get a opinion from legal, because I think that within itself creates a problem. It makes it problematic if it's something that is presented to that student athlete in the beginning of their recruiting.
Okay.
Just a quick response to that, Mr. Chair.
Quick response, then we're going.
And thank you, Representative DeBerry, and I think that's a valid question. But the thing is that if this bill is enacted, it's going to be public. They don't have to present it to the student athlete. The student athletes will know that it exists. So if that helps, Mr. DeBerry, Representative DeBerry, I hope it does.
Okay, why don't, without further objection, why don't we? Did you have a question first? Okay, Representative Kane, you're recognized.
Most sports programs at universities are not funded through tuition. I mean, it's through these dollars that we're talking about that they build those great practice fields and stadium maintenance and pay all their coaching staff. Do you think they're going to have an issue when we're taking 1%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking millions and millions of dollars across the state out of those programs? Are they going to raise tuition on the student body to compensate for the lack of funds coming in because we're diverting a percentage? It's just a question. I don't have an answer.
And thank you, Representative Kane. And I would hope not, but when you talk about $102 million a year, Representative Kane, and we're looking at 1% of that's coming back to the school, I would hope that the universities and colleges would do the right thing and understanding and making sure that this is revenue that's going to create more revenue for them in the process.
Okay, without objection, I'd like to invite the UT system or the TBR system come up and give us an explanation of how you. I know we say we're talking about 1%. We'd like to know how that affects you, and give us your opinion on this unique concept. You're recognized. Just state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lou Hanneman for the University of Tennessee. And this is obviously an issue that is getting a lot of play. And while I can't speak to any of the issues that Mr. Harris brought up, those are between him and the university. I could certainly, have a compliance officer come and speak to at least the generalities of those issues if need be. As far as the legislation, we haven't seen a copy of the amendment, but as I understand it, the 1% part of it is not all that different from the original bill. Pulling out 1% of gross receipts for all of the campuses in Tennessee other than UT Knoxville is pulling 1% out of the academic enterprise. Straight out of the academic enterprise. All of those institutions fund the majority of their athletics not from gross receipts from, tickets and things of that nature. They're subsidized by the base operations. Those are tuition dollars. Those are state appropriated dollars. UT Knoxville, perhaps in 2012, ran $102 million, and that could have been seen as a profit, but that's not the case. The University of Tennessee Knoxville, at one point in time, used to shift money back into the academic enterprise. They've had to halt that process because they've seen a decline in revenues, a decline in ticket sales to some extent, and other factors that include building up facilities and whatnot. When you pull 1% of the receipts out of a given fiscal year, that's lost money. And whether you get it back 4 years later or not, those are salaries, those are operating dollars needed for that given fiscal year that you don't have access to. Aside from that, also on the 1%, given that UT Knoxville is, without a doubt, the most profitable, if you can call it that, institution in the state in terms of gross receipts, what you would be looking at essentially is the University of Tennessee Knoxville paying about 70 to 75% of the overall pool on which these funds are going to be generating interest. That would be for all graduating student athletes across the state. UT Chattanooga, UT Martin, I believe, if I remember from the original fiscal note, it was a pretty small amount of dollars that they would be contributing to the fund overall. I think that, again, I haven't seen a fiscal note on the amendment. If the 1% totals are kind of like it was before, I believe it was $400,000 or $500,000 coming from UT Knoxville, and another 200,000 or so from the remaining institutions in the state. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I think that on the funding question, we would have a lot of reservations about pulling out 1% of our gross receipts. As to the NCAA, I would have to differ with Representative Parkinson on this issue. It is a clear and articulated violation for any student athlete to be attending a school where there's an understanding that upon graduation as a student athlete that you'll be compensated in any way. If I could refer to NCAA bylaw 12.1.2, subsection B, accepts a promise of pay even if such pay is to be received following completion of intercollegiate athletics participation. The idea that a student could on the front end know that they, by attending a post-secondary institution and participating in an athletic program, that they could be compensated for that afterwards through a guaranteed receipt, even if it's a prorated amount based on how many graduates there are, would be a clear violation and would put the institution in direct conflict with the NCAA. Now, in my conversations with compliance officers at all three of our institutions, they all three acknowledge that the NCAA is considering all manner of approaches to dealing with this issue. One of those is postgraduate compensation, but they haven't made any progress on, in that regards to date. The last point that I would make is, well, actually, I'll leave it at that and be happy to answer any questions as best I can.
Okay, any questions before we go to the Chairman Brooks?
Let me ask in regard to the. I don't know if you know this or not. I'm just curious. UT Knoxville is it correct to say self-supporting?
It is.
Okay. Is UT Martin self-supporting?
No, sir.
UT Chattanooga?
No, sir.
Okay.
Both of those institutions receive operational dollars from the academic enterprise.
Okay. Do we know the percentage of what they received?
Uh,
I don't. If I had a copy of our fiscal note breakdown in front of me, I could provide that to you. I could certainly get that to the members.
Okay. Do you know if it's a substantial percentage that the
It's a
institution
substantial
supports?
percentage. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Because, I mean, those particular colleges aren't raking in the dollars on TV time and advertising and this and that.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could, Chairman, I remember the third point I was going to make.
Go ahead.
Student athletes, when they do come, even if it's just tuition and room and board, at UT Knoxville, you're talking about almost $100,000. That's pretty significant, and I understand they contribute a significant amount of time and effort, and while they don't see the advertising dollars in terms of being compensated, and the University of Tennessee does, it's the brand that recruited the student, and the student becomes a part of the brand. Part of that is the degree. When you come as a student athlete, you're offered the opportunity to walk away with a University of Tennessee degree, and that's something worth having at the end of the day. At UT Chattanooga, a in-state student who's recruited and participates as a student athlete, it's about $65,000. An out-of-state student, that might go up to about $190,000. far in excess of the grant money that might be available under this legislation. And I would hazard the guess that over a lifetime of earnings with a degree, period, you'd be in far better stead than just leaving without.
Representative Pitts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hammond, some would argue that last point, that these students, if they come from disadvantaged backgrounds, low to moderate income families, they're watching their teammates, their classmates, their friends go out and enjoy pizza, and, you know, they're at home sitting in the dorm doing without. But the question I have is, does UT spend 100% of its proceeds every year, or does it have a reserve fund, sinking fund, reserve account?
I would hazard the guess that they do have a reserve account. I don't know what the numbers are precisely. I could certainly find that out for you.
But as a practice, they don't spend 100% of what they take in a given year, unless external factors such as
I believe in the
ticket
last
sales,
couple of
et cetera.
years, we've actually buttressed right up to the edge, whether it was to, you know, kind of take care of capital needs, but also in terms of straight up operational dollars. You may or may not remember, up till a year or so ago, or 2 years ago, the athletics department actually returned, you know, upwards of $10 million back to the academic programs at Knoxville. They've suspended that indefinitely, simply because of that. You know, revenues are down for any number of reasons, the recession not the least of which, but also
product on the field, maybe.
I'll leave that to you.
I understand. Obviously, I'm not a UT graduate, and they'll be rescinding my citizenship.
Times are tough
probably.
for all.
All right.
But I do think that profit margin that was there 5-10 years ago, you know, when UT Knoxville was one of maybe 5 or 10 institutions in the country that were really generating a profit, that situation is not the same as it was.
Okay. Thank you. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hauser, since I called your name, do you want to comment on the TBR system?
Very simply, Ginger Hauser, Tennessee Board of Regents. Our athletic programs don't make money. We subsidize those with general operating revenue. I was talking to Mr. Roper from University of Memphis, and their subsidy is about $1.2 million that they use general university dollars to support athletics. So unfortunately, I'd like to say that our athletic programs make money, but in fact they don't. We subsidize that in order to contribute to the campus life and in order to give these students an opportunity to go to college and have an athletic experience. So we're concerned about setting some of that money aside for these athletes, although understanding the contributions that they make provide for the campus life that we all enjoy, those of us who go to universities.
Okay, we have any further questions while we're in recess? Representative Love?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may be a question for, I'm trying to figure out who would be able to answer it. When we're in our conferences, like I know a lot of UT schools maybe in the SEC, and I know some TBR schools in OVC, do they get money for one of the teams going to bowl games?
Yes, sir, I believe they do, and I believe that's figured into the overall operating dollar or the budget, the revenue budget.
So with the tremendous success of UT's football team going to bowl games, is that spread across the entire UT system, or does it just stay in UT Knoxville's program?
That is a campus specific. Up until about, I guess it was about 4 years ago, the athletics department was actually administratively tied to the system.
Okay.
So I don't know exactly what the distribution of those dollars might have been at that time, but since then, the athletics department is now firmly under the auspice of the campus, and so their receipts, because they aren't in the same athletic conference as Martin or Chattanooga, theirs would fall under their operating dollars.
And I'm certainly concerned about the money for athletic dollars. I know at Tennessee State we're paying to play at a stadium that we helped the city get, oddly enough. But I know that's about $30,000 a year for the next 20 years, so we certainly could use some money back at Tennessee State just to help our students. That's another subject for another time. Just want to find out where these bowl game dollars may have played a factor in here, though. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions while we're in recess? Seeing none, we're back in session. Thank you so very much. Representative Parkinson. Okay, committee, we still are on the amendment. We did have a motion and a second on that. Any further discussion on the amendment, committee?
Mr. Chair, you mind if I just make one quick statement?
Go ahead.
Just to respond to and you know, Mr. Chair, I didn't expect them to come up here and say, hey, we want to make sure we take care of our student athletes. I think most of us expected them to come up and say what they were saying. And I think most of us expected them to come up here and say, after $102 million in 2012 or 2013, that they didn't make any money. But $102 million is $102 million. I don't care how you slice it. And Mr. Chair, and finally, in the campus life, one of the speakers mentioned the campus life that people enjoy. But I think most of the enjoyment is coming from those athletic directors that are making their salaries, the coaches that are making their millions of dollars, but not necessarily from the student athletes that's holed up in a dorm that have to sit there, and the only thing they have to do is live, eat, sleep, and breathe the sport that they play. And still sustain that lifelong injury that they leave without, and once they're finished, they're discarded, basically as if they never existed. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, committee, any further questions? And I think one way I evaluate these things, that is, as we move forward, I think you brought us a unique concept, one that, and I appreciate Mr. Harris being here to expound on that, but I think we still got a lot of moving parts in this, and we might want to discuss that. But in order to get the bill in order so that we can vote on it one way or the other, we're on the amendment 013041, which makes the bill. All those in any further discussion of the amendment? Seeing none, the question has been called for. All those in favor of adding the amendment to the bill, please indicate by saying aye. Opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. The amendment is on the bill. We also had one other amendment, Amendment 2, 014440. Representative Parkinson, you explain what that did?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What this amendment does is it instructs the treasurer to, once this student graduation grant fund is solvent and able to self-perpetuate itself, to come back to this body to have the trust fund portion of it removed.
Okay, any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, without objection, the question is called for. All those in favor of adding Amendment 2 onto the bill, please indicate by saying aye. Opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Amendment 2 goes onto the bill. That brings us back onto the bill, House Bill 2147, as amended. Further discussion on the bill. Representative Kane.
Okay, we heard when we were at a session, Lou mentioned about the NCAA and the requirements that you cannot offer anything. Now, I know they're making progress in new, because I had student athletes, and I can tell you, you know, I appreciate his injury. Of course, my daughter was a Lady Vol, and they told us they would take care of her injury post-graduation. So I don't know if the Lady Vols have a different standard than the men Vols. I don't know. But I'm concerned about passing this. I love the concept because I think these athletes do need to be compensated because they do make the university a lot of money and get nothing. But the compliance issue is the part that I'm a little concerned. I think that's what Mr. DeBerry, or Representative DeBerry brought up too, about how if we pass this and then we become in violation of the NCAA, what does that do for us as a team? Do you know what I mean? Or am I just rattling?
Representative Kane, I absolutely do not think you're just rattling. I think you're raising a point that should be looked at. But here are my thoughts on that. The NCAA is a governing body of college sports right now, and they're even looking at how can we solve this problem. But secondly, and more importantly, we're the state of Tennessee, Representative Kane, and we can decide how we want to move forward with our how we want our student athletes to be handled in our state. And I'm saying that to say this, that if we can move this bill forward, I'm willing to sit down and look at and seeing if there's ways that we can adjust the bill to make sure that we're outside of that.
Yeah, because the reason we make the $102 million is because we are in these leagues. And if we get booted out of the leagues because we're not compliant, then we don't have the $102 million, and then the student athletes don't get anything, if I'm connecting the dots.
And thank you, Representative Kane. And I was watching Meet the Press this weekend. Actually, this very subject was on Meet the Press, and they discussed it with Mark Emmert, who is over the NCAA. And I sent that to everyone on the committee. I hope that you received a video from that. And the NCAA is really, I believe, looking at ways to make sure that this problem is solved. And I think that this bill could be a model for the NCAA to use moving forward. And it's a good bill. It's well thought of, and maybe we need to pass the bill and present it. But I will say this: if we pass this bill out, if we pass this bill on the floor, on the House floor and in the Senate, I am willing to work through it to either get the NCAA to jump on board or and let this become their model, or work through it to make sure that, to try to find a way anyway to make sure that we don't lose any NCAA revenue.
Representative Berry.
Here again, I think that this bears more discussion. So I plan to support it out of the subcommittee, hopefully to get more discussion in the full committee. But I would hope that during the course of our discussion that we not lose sight of the fact that these young people are student athletes, that they sign on not to play basketball or football, but to get an education. That the main draw for the University of Tennessee, University of Memphis, UT Chat, is the level of education that they offer. And that education is supposed to prepare that person to make a living for the rest of their lives. So while we discuss this because of the enormous sums of money that we're talking about, I think that bears discussion, I don't want that to get lost during the discussion, that athlete is a student, and being a student is his first and foremost criterion for being at that institution. And so let's not lose that in the midst of the discussion.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Representative D. Berry. And
quickly, and that we're going
yes, and that's
move on
the very reason. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why we have the graduation stipulation in it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Representative Pitts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would first of all give the sponsor the Rick Womack Award for passion, because clearly he's got a passion and have studied this issue. But I would move that we move it on to full committee. We know what the issues and hurdles are, and if we can't cure the defect, especially the NCAA defect, then that's going to be too big a hurdle to overcome. So I would make a motion we move this out of subcommittee, recognize this our last calendar, and give the sponsor time to work with those objections to see if there indeed is a remedy.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Before we entertain them, I do like to say one thing, but I want the committee to keep in mind is that if the committee does move it on forward, we are always talking about higher fees for our students and everything, and we put a lot of burden on higher ed. So we really need to be careful if we want to move it out to full committee for further discussion. But I do think there's still a lot of moving parts on this. Great idea, but there's a lot of burden we're putting on our higher ed too. So there's a motion on the floor, and it's been seconded. Representative Pitts, would you restate your motion?
I will, Mr. Chairman. I move that we move this bill to full committee to give the sponsor time to work on the objections that have been raised by University of Tennessee, TBR, especially in light of the NCAA bylaw violation that this could create. And then I'll just publicly say that if we can't cure the defects, then I'll not support it in full, but I could support it moving on.
Any further discussion? Seeing none on that motion, all those that approve the motion, which will be House Bill 2147 to full committee, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The ayes have it. It does move out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee.